Oh, okay.
Am I the only one that cannot hear Martins?
Terrible now. Hello.
Yeah,
Sorry, we
you
can't hear
cannot.
him. Yeah.
Can you hear him?
No.
Yes or no?
No, we can't hear him.
No.
Can you hear me? Just a little bit. Can you hear me now? Yeah. 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 Yeah.
Martins, you need one microphone for the other one.
Terrible now. Hello.
Hi,
So
hello, Martins.
I think you can hear me now. I
Yes, we
apologize.
can.
I thought this had been sorted out earlier on. For some reason, everything seems to have changed. Um, I just need to confirm also. Can you see the slide? Is it up on your end too?
Yes, we can see the slide.
Okay, awesome. Okay, so just get things rolling. Hi everyone, and I have to apologize for the mix-up that just occurred now. Try to save as much time as possible, and thanks Viola for the intro. I felt you might have remembered way too much about Sokoto than I can even remember. And you were correct about the other details. The masters just happened middle of this month, last month rather. And my hope is today that once we talk about the topic, which is study skills and note taking, everybody's able to get something decent from it. And I hope I don't bore people because everyone's tired on a Sunday evening actually. So I'll just get to the meat of the matter. Um, I'm happy that everybody's quite interactive. So I think the first thing I'll do is to bring up a simple question, which is tied to things relating to studying. So let's paint this scenario. We have a classroom of say primary two or primary three students, and the teacher has given some handouts or a brief material for everyone to read so that they can prepare for class on Monday. And it was a junior's job to read that particular material and prepare for the class. So the teacher on Monday decides to ask, points to Junior and says, okay, you know what, Junior, could you please list any of three planets that you know, like any three planets in the solar system? And we have Junior just staring at the teacher at that moment, really thinking hard and could not even answer the question. And the teacher goes ahead to ask Junior, like, did you study the preparatory material for this class over the weekend? Now let's assume you guys are junior, right? What would be your reply to this question from the teacher? I'm actually looking at the chat section to see what people would say. I hope the chat is actually available for everyone. Okay, awesome. I'll just wait.
Available.
Yeah, just wait briefly. I would like to see what people think about it. Like, if they are junior, what would be their reply, considering the fact that they've gotten this material? Now, teacher is asking, did you study this material? Considering the fact that you can't answer this question I just asked, what would be their reply to this question? Okay, let's not stress everybody out. The answers from zero can actually vary. There's an instance where junior can literally say, well, I didn't read the material, so I don't know why you're singling me out for this punishment. Somebody else can just come up and say, you know what, junior probably read the material, but he just can't remember that particular question, right? And someone might say, you know what, he read the material, probably understood every other part, but not that particular question. And if you remember, the question the teacher asked was, did you study? And that brings us to the part that we are much more interested in today. Like, what does it mean to study? Why do we study? I mean, we are looking at the possibility of getting studying as a skill set that we add to our other skill sets to improve our lives, either in terms of education, just general casual reading, or in our workplace. And for every skill that you get, you actually think of getting that skill because you feel it to give you an advantage, right? And in the case of studying, the advantage we are thinking of getting is, if I can study effectively, if I can study well enough, I should be able to gain knowledge for longer. Basically, you're much more interested in acquiring knowledge, right? And if you do acquire knowledge, you want to remember that knowledge that you have acquired. And finally, you want to be able to tell somebody, this is knowledge I've acquired, and this is what I remember. And there's this popular quote that is attributed to Einstein, which says, if you can't explain it to a 6-year-old, it means you don't understand it yourself. So if you've truly studied a material, right? If you studied something, okay, thanks for that input. So I hope with this we can actually sort out the reception issues. So the idea is, if you've truly studied a material, right? In the end, you should be able to distill the knowledge down to what matters the most. And then you should be able to explain to anybody that comes to you. So it means, of course, you know what you're saying, you've acquired the knowledge, you remember what is important, and then you're able to tell someone, see, this is what is important in this old book. This is what's important in this old document. This is what's important in this old video that I watch. Because, of course, the materials we read or we study do not necessarily have to be just books or text. They can be in video format, they can be in audio, and every attempt to acquire knowledge in a sense is actually studying, right? But the truth of the matter is, there is actually a system, right? Studying is not just the same thing as reading. I mean, reading was a skill we got back in the day when you went to school. The idea is, if you see a string of words, you should translate to this information, and that's you reading through to get that information. But studying is, it's a bit much more complex, right? But the truth is, almost all of us know how to do it. And that's something we'll come to next. So there is a system for sort of studying different type of material, and there's an acronym for it, and it's called the SQ3R, which briefly just stands for being able to survey, to question, then you read, you review, recite, and then you review. And what we have done here is we're also using the technique in studying, which is like distilling something that might be quite long and winding into something small using a simple acronym. And like I said, the system is just these 5 steps, and it has been distilled to this word, SQ3R. But we'll get back to it. That's a system for studying that is quite popular and it's quite effective. But the thing is, what is the intent of you studying those material, right? Materials can come in different form, and your intent for looking at them might differ from one person to the other. So for instance, if I get a simple mail in my mailbox, right? It's an ad, right? I might not be so interested in an ad. So it makes sense that instead of using the SQ3R, I just pick out what's important to me, which is I just survey the whole thing and decide, you know what, I'm not sure this is for me, and I move on. I don't need to go through all the whole systems of studying for an ad in my mailbox. Some might also argue that that's not the case. When I pick up a book, I really want to enjoy the book. I want to know what's happening, the storyline that is being told. And for such a person with a book like this, you probably want to survey it initially, and they do that easily for you because if you flip the book over, they will tell you a breakdown of what the story is all about. And then if you flip to the front, you see the name of the author and the title. You're already getting a sense of what you're about to get into. And with that, you sort of bring up questions in your mind as to, you know what, I'd like to see what happens in this, since it seems like a thriller. Is it a thriller? And then you go from that into reading it properly, and then you're done. You don't go to the other steps because once you're done with reading, for you, it's all you wanted to get, and you move on. But then you can have a research paper. The one shown on the screen currently is it's a research paper from last year, IT robotics. For anybody reading this, depending on their intent, they might just skim through, and with that, they can just get the information from the abstract, right? For other people, they may want to know other things, and they now have to follow through with the whole system that we have described earlier. And that's what makes it different, or what makes it different, depending on what you are about to read and what your intent for reading or studying is in the first place. But the truth is, intent can change. And an interesting story that came up roughly 10 years ago was this story that came out of Minneapolis. Target, this big retailing setup, had discovered that a particular subset of their customer base was very loyal. And that subset was expectant or awaiting mothers. So they turned all the data they could get to decide or to know ahead of time who is already pregnant so that they can start giving those people coupons on purchases so that they can get ahead of their competitors. And Target did this with the intent that if they get it right, then people would patronize them more. But something funny happened. They sent out one of those mails containing all those coupons, and it happened to be for a teenage girl. And the person who read the mail was her father. Now, the default nature, just like the example I gave previously, is this is an email. It's more or less like an ad, right? Most people just want to skim through. But the man skimmed through, and the first thing he noticed was that every single thing in this mail were literally baby products, coupons for baby products. Anybody in their right mind will have just skimmed through and moved on. But this is a father, a concerned father, and he had to ask himself the first question, like, what am I saying? This is reality changing in his own eyes. Like, why would they be sending my teenage daughter an email for coupons that's specifically tailored towards baby products? That's a question that's coming up in his mind, right? And the next thing he does is, you know what? Let me look at the mail again. Let me get answers to this question by reading attentively section by section, and then trying to question myself as I read through the section to be sure that what I think is not what is happening. Because to him, it sounds wild that his daughter will be getting this kind of ad. And he moved through the reading stage, then moved through the research stage, and finally had to now review what he had just seen. And the next thing he did was to walk up to the office, stay there in Minneapolis to ask the manager what was really going on and why his daughter was getting this mail. And of course, at the end of the day, sorry for the spoiler, that at the end of the day, he discovered that his daughter was indeed pregnant. It meant that Target had shut that down. But what you will notice is the man came in to just skim through an ad. But then his intent changed immediately after skimming through. He discovered he had to study this thing properly to understand what is really going on. And then he simply would have followed, because this is an imagined scenario, but I guess that's what happened. But he would have simply followed through with the steps of studying that we just talked about, which is the SQ3R, because now he has to absorb the information he's looking at, right? And that means that some of us might in quotes have bad study skills, or we feel that we can improve on it. But the truth of the matter is, it's not that hard because we already know the rules. When the time comes, when we need to actually intensively study, depending on what pressures we have on our necks, we actually do follow through. What you would normally do to improve something that you are not exactly sure of the steps or how to do it is to actually know what the steps are in the first place. And then when you know what the steps are, you decide what your intent is, then you know which part of the rule you need to follow. what steps you need to take depending on what your intent is. And that is the reason why we are talking about the SQ3R again. But this time we'll talk about it sort of in detail. So the first part is the S, the survey, right? And the idea of surveying is, you just want to have a sense of what is really going on, a mind map of a mental structure of what this book documents, information source is all about. So I want to know the title. I want to know a brief introduction, a summary. I also want to know what are the sections of this particular document, right? And of course, I want to see if there's any graphic or diagram that can help me figure out some things, which is why a lot of children would always tell you, this book is boring. There's no pictures in it. It's a question of, for the survey part, what you're trying to really sort out is, do I really want to read this? And most importantly, if I feel that I need to read it, but I feel it's boring, how do I stimulate my interest in it, right? And that's what the survey part is supposed to do. It's supposed to give you a mental frame of what this whole document is about, what part you might be interested in, and how you probably will go about reading it, which is why a lot of people sort of enjoyed the feature on YouTube when you started adding timestamps, which breaks down the parts of the video you're about to watch. Someone were to just give you a 10-minute video, you'd probably be interested in watching it. But if I gave you a 15-minute video on the same topic, you probably will be disinterested, right? But if you have timestamp breaking this into parts, saying like, okay, you know what, I need to go to this section. That's what I'm interested in. And that's what the survey part sort of does for you. The next part will be the question. If I've already gotten the mental structure of what a document, an information source is all about, the next thing I want to really know is, what would each of these parts answer for me? And subconsciously, what we tend to do at that point is we start having questions that we want to ask of those parts. So now we want to engage and concentrate. So we now have questions we prepare for those parts. And this is something people tend to miss. If you've surveyed the document, for instance, and you really want to continue reading, you survey you understand what the structure is. It makes sense to actually write down questions first, not just jump into readings and then answer questions that you think you imagine. It makes sense to actually write down the first questions first. And on the basis of that, you can now read. These questions will guide you to the part that you are really interested in, because now you know why you're reading, right? And of course, without stating the obvious, the next part of actually is to read it. Now that you have the structure, the questions for each of the sections, next thing you want to actually do is read. And what does reading do? Simply just fills up information around the structures you've built and answer those questions you've initially set, right? The next part is recite. If I've read something, I've finished a section of the stuff, I want to ask myself, do I really know what I just read? And one of the ways you do that is actually to answer those questions you set initially, right? So it's like a recursive process. I've told myself, this is the knowledge I've gathered from this section that I've just read. And I answer the questions that were brought up initially. And what I've said, or my answers to these questions, are they truly correct? Or am I doubting myself? I'm reciting the answers I have to myself to see whether they make any sense, to know whether I've actually grasped the knowledge that content is sharing. If it doesn't, then I go back, of course, right? And then the next part will be to review. The review part is actually the end of the process. And if you notice, it's more or less like you going back, checking again what you have already read. But at the end of the day, what you are much more interested in the review part is, what is my take home from all this? I've learned everything I've learned. I've answered the question I want to answer. Is the structure I created initially truly the correct structure of the way the content is supposed to flow? Or does reading it actually change the information that I think I knew? And most importantly, what am I going to retain in memory? And it's important that we mention memory here, because apparently at the end of the whole day, if you remember when we talked about the skill itself, we said you're going to acquire knowledge, but you need to remember that knowledge. And then finally share that knowledge with someone, right? So at the end of the day, at the very core of studying is the process of understanding how the memory works. And this is where it gets interesting, right? Everybody forgets. In fact, it's natural to forget. If you're not forgetting, there's a problem. But the interesting thing about the forgetting process is that almost 50% of what we learn If you were to pick up a book and read it and you wake up the next day, half of that information is actually gone. I wouldn't say it's lost forever. I'll just say it's not something you can easily retrieve. You're most likely to remember things that happened while you're reading than even the contents in the book that you're reading at that time. And if you wait for a week, then 90% of that information is actually gone, meaning you're just left with roughly 10%. So it's very important that you tell yourself during the reading process or the studying process rather, you need to really figure out what is the most important thing. What's that important 10% that you want to remember after a week? Because if you don't do that, if you don't control the process of what you would remember, what you reinforce in memory, when a week comes, the 10% that you remember will not be what you can control. And you can remember anything. You can be like Junior and remember every other thing about the solar system but the planets. And that is, it's very important because I've seen this back in the day where I'll do with students, even classmates sometimes, and they'll read for hours on end. And then when it gets to the testing period, what you notice is questions that are brought up are quite simple. The person knows all the formulas, knows all the proofs, knows all the definition, but does not understand the nitty-gritty of the subject. That part to them was not important. They didn't find a way to reinforce it. They just assumed that if they crammed in all the knowledge, it will stick to the time they needed it, which is not true. Like I said, it's human to forget, right? So you need to be very, very sure of what you want to keep and make sure that thing sticks when you study and when you review and when you recite. It's very important that that part is what stays with you continuously, because when you're asked, what about this thing you studied? It doesn't matter to anybody how many hours you put in. What matters is that you're able to repeat to them the information in the clearest possible manner when it is asked for. And most often than not, people don't ask for the things at the edge of the wall. They ask for the most obvious things. If you remember, we said earlier on about Einstein's quote was around if you cannot explain to a 6-year-old, you probably don't understand it at all. A 6-year-old is going to ask you questions. They will not ask you edge cases. They just want to ask you what is the most important thing. And they hope that you would explain it back to them. And this is when note taking comes into play. We've talked about memory all this while, right? And if you notice, everything you want to do in the studying process, things like setting up questions, reviewing those questions, reciting the information you know, distilling the information to simpler formats that you understand, you really have to take note of those things during the stages of studying. But the truth is, if you decide to take mental notes, then you succumb to the same issue that we had before, which is you're most likely going to forget. Right there in the process of studying, if you're taking mental note of these things, you most likely forget. So the best approach will have been to take an external note. And that's where note taking really comes into play, right? If you're taking a mental note, you see the processes, but if you're taking an external note, which is relevant for every stage of the SQ3R, then you're most likely going to be making a conscious effort to reinforce in memory what you're learning, the questions you're asking as you go, right? And note taking, like every other thing I'm about to mention, are actually techniques to slow down the process of forgetting and to reinforce knowledge into memory. Note taking is one. Another one is actually spaced repetition. That same graph we had earlier on about the forgetting curve. If you were to say, you know what, I'm going to go back to the same knowledge, the notes I've taken, the questions I've asked of myself when I studied, and I'm going to try to ask myself this question and see whether I remember. What tends to happen is if you do that frequently, you reduce the pace at which you forget. And it's clearly shown in the second graph there. You reduce the pace at which you forget. And the funny thing, like I said earlier on, is we don't really forget. What tends to happen is that we cannot access that same information compared to the easier ones we are able to pull out. So once you give yourself a reason to go back to that note you've taken, if you give yourself a question which you have set up initially, and probably a clue to what the answer could be, you will discover you remember almost everything that you have read at that time. You've already told yourself, well, this is 10% that matters to me the most. But there's a 90% that I'm not so interested in, but I think it's also important to know. If I've set up questions on these things and I go back to them, I will still remember as many as possible, which means that instead of forgetting 90% of everything after a week, I can still retain close to 90%. Which to me, that's quite important, especially when it comes to studying. In academic setting, in the workplace setting, all these things would matter, definitely matter. If I can remember clearly when I was working, half the time was spent reading mails, and they were long and windy. And if you miss out important facts in those mails, it could spell problem for the operations that you were dealing with at that time. So for me at the workplace, apart from every other thing I did with respect to my projects and whatnot, mails actually happen to be important pieces of information that I had to focus and study sometimes. So this is not just applicable to just school, it applies everywhere else. Another thing I would like to bring up when it comes to retaining knowledge is memory hacks. So if we were to go back to what happened to Junior the last time, let's assume that he indeed studied, but for some reason he could not remember easily because he didn't focus on the planet. One thing he could have done is create a mnemonic, right? One popular one I used to know back in the day for the list of planets in our solar system was my very excellent meridian sit uprightly near Peter. And if you were to say that, you remember the first word, the first letters in each of the words would actually read out to map to like the planets in that same order. And if you had something like that as a kid or even someone in the workplace now, depending on what information you want to store, this is a memory hack that can help you remember. Another approach, apart from just the general mnemonics, is to look at acronyms, right? One I remember from way back GS2 is REMIAPOS, right? Rest in Music, a period of silence. And it's funny that over 10 years later, I can still remember exactly how it is because it was just a hack that was used at that time to remember this thing. To me, music was cool, but definitions were boring and I needed to sort it out. And this is the way I did it. And that's what solved it for me. So if you guys can apply this to whatever you're learning, then you would notice that life could become easier because you can deal with the boring parts, enjoy the incredible stuff you're learning, the knowledge you're acquiring, and for the times when people need you to regurgitate information like definitions, proofs, and whatnot, then use hacks like this to sort them out. But there are instances where you need to load up a lot of information, right? And I mean, you can't have 20 mnemonics by just reading parts of a document. So there are certain times people just say, you know what, I'm just going to go high. I'm going to use a memory palace. I have this construct of a place in my mind. I'm just going to store the information in different parts. And anytime I want to get it, I just walk into that same place in my mind and just access those things. But for anybody that's interested in that, you can as well check the book by Joshua Fourier that talks exactly about that. He talked about his journey going through the memory palace competition worldwide and how he was able to become uh, a champion in that regard, as far as storing so much information in his head. So for those of you that are interested in storing all the numbers of pi, this will be wonderful. Next, we'll talk about study tools. We've talked about how to reinforce knowledge. We've talked about note taking as one. We've talked about the memory hacks. We've also talked about spaced repetition, right? But now I want to talk about tools. What tools can really help for you to study and follow through with that system we've talked about? And well, as Da Vinci put it, simplicity is the ultimate sophistication, right? At the end of the day, you probably just want to stick to pencil and paper. If you have pencil and paper, then you can as well follow through with the techniques we've talked about. And an interesting page template, we have the ruled page template, and a lot of people don't notice it, but those lines that are not there for just fancy purposes. On the left side of that ruled line, the red ruled line, depending on what design or template or book that you're using. If you're using the standard one we use in school, you're supposed to actually use that side of stuff to store information like explanations of things you've read, the questions you want to ask yourself. And if you noticed, when we did exams like WIAC and the rest, we tend to have exactly the same format, but on a bigger paper. And somehow they made it even broader and they tell you the rules as to, okay, you can do this, but you can't do this on this rule page. At the end of the day, the pencil and paper is in fact the simplest tool you can use to write down your notes. And on the other side, follow through with the study process, which is I want to skim through this thing. What is the structure? What is the mind map? I want to ask questions of each of the sections. I want to see how answer those questions, and I want to recite back or regurgitate information where necessary. And you can do that right on paper. Some people use highlighters when it comes to books. Some people just stick with the bare bone pencil and paper when they're dealing with the work. My assumption is that almost everybody here is probably quite in tune with tech, or at least as a device, because we are joining on one. So I'll probably make a list of some of those tools too, right? Uh, So for note taking, there are a number of tools. I just listed out the ones that I use. So I'm guessing if you search online, you'll find way more, right? And what I've noticed is for note taking, you can just have the simple good notes, works on almost all devices. The element note is something similar. And then you have Obsidian. Obsidian is actually free. So if you're someone that really likes note taking and truly believe in the Zscaler system and also the external memory kind of thing or external brain, you can check out the Obsidian. But my advice would be keep it short and simple, right? So next thing I'd like to talk about is annotation tools. Now, difference between note taking and annotation is quite fine, yeah, because with note taking, you're writing directly on the note itself. But with annotation, it's like you have a document, but you want to write extra information. So you're not writing a new note at all, not necessarily. You're writing on the same document, but on the side, which is what we've just explained with pencil and paper. You're not wiping out what has been there that you want to read. You're just writing on the side. The note tools that we've mentioned before is you writing something from scratch, right? And for annotation, I've listed about 3 tools there. Our note is actually free, and I think it's available on some platforms. I'm not sure if it's available on mobile devices, but you can as well check depending on what they've done right now. And with that, you can actually take notes. Most of these apps require a pen, so depending on the device, it's something you want to consider. But for Drawboard, PDF, and Obsidian, you definitely do not need one because you can type in these tools directly. The last thing I want to mention is spaced repetition. One of the most popular tools for spaced repetition is Anki, and the idea behind spaced repetition for these tools is I'm reading, I want to ask questions that I want you to quiz myself later, right? And Anki does that the best. Obsidian also has a plugin for spaced repetition, meaning you can use that free and get exactly the same benefit for free. And the last thing I would like to talk about is AI tools. One of those that I've used so far, which I would recommend, is Notebook LM by Google. And I just created a snapshot of an instance where I used it. And if you follow through with the system we've just discussed so far, the survey, the questioning, the read, recite, and review, you can actually do every single part of those steps within this tool. Now, this is the caveat. I know that a lot of people would like to use AI tools, but they skip the reading parts when it comes to AI tools because they assume, well, that's the whole point. I'm using it so I don't have to do that work. I would strongly advise that you don't do that because, I mean, that's the conflict we have today, like using AI tools responsibly. So that's what I would just like to share with you. If you were to create an account with Google, if you already have one, then you can simply just go to Notebook Element and you automatically have an account and you're able to get this feature for free. I think you're restricted to probably 10 notebooks per day, meaning that you can use this continuously. And what you notice is if you were to add a simple document to the Notebook LM, it loads it up and gives you a summary. That already helps you out with figuring out what the whole structure of this document is. If you want to go further and get a mind map, you will notice that right there at in the middle panel at the bottom right, you would see a button for mind map, meaning that you can actually generate a mind map right out of the box. And what that does is goes through the section of documents and just gives you a sense as to how each of the parts are connected. And that's really will help you the first part of the studying system we just discussed, which is the survey, right? The next thing is how do you generate questions? I mean, this is a language model. This tool can actually help you with that. So you can literally type in, and if you notice right at the bottom where you're supposed to start typing, right? You would notice that there are some made questions that you can already ask the LM agent of the document you're reading. So automatically it means that the parts where you're supposed to question yourself about the documents are already being listed there, which is questions you can already ask. And by default, they're there. But you can also ask, you can set up more questions that you're thinking about, and you can choose to ask the document directly. The good thing is that when you ask the agents questions, it gives you answers, or it also does the extra thing of watermarking those answers, meaning you would literally see a reference in the answer to the document. So one of the issues I've had with AI tools is hallucination, where it just assumes something and just gives you something imaginary, which doesn't necessarily have to be in document, but it just imagines and gives you. This tool does not do that. This tool will give you a reference document, and you need to check to be double sure. Once you click on the button or the number where the reference is given, it will lead you exactly to where in the document is bringing that information from, which I think is quite important. Another thing that it actually gives you out of the box is the ability to generate sort of audio podcast. If you look at the third panel, on the top of the third panel is actually a feature called audio overview from the studio. And you can actually click on that button. Sometimes it takes a while, depending on document length. But let's assume you have a 5 or 7 page document that should be roughly around 10 to 15 minutes of generation. It will generate for you an audio podcast of 2 persons talking about the document you're about to read. And it will tell you almost everything contained in that document. So essentially, if you feel overwhelmed reading documents, or you don't want to read, or you feel you are disinterested, if you do this, then you can listen to 2 people talking about your document. And that sort of takes away the pressure, because now you know what the document is about without stressing so much, and then you can just go through the reading process. Remember, I just mentioned you still have to go through the reading process. Do not assume out of the box that the agent is supposed to give you all the information. Then after that, it's just the recite phase, right? Recite is you getting information, trying to understand what you read, being sure, and all the question answering tools are literally in this particular tool, right? You can get the questions, you can formulate your own questions and ask, and you can take notes. If you notice, there's a yellow button right there in the middle panel where you can take notes, right? You can save the summary as a note, you can take notes, and when you ask questions, it would take into cognizance the notes you've made, the summary, and every other document you add after the fact. So yeah, that's me giving a brief on an AI tool that you can use for your studying processes. But I have to mention again, you still have to read. Do not assume that the AI tool is going to give you everything. And yeah, that's basically all we are going to talk about for today. I really hope I've not spent way more than the time allotted. So thanks for everyone for joining, and I will hand over things back to Abiola at this point.
Thank you very much, Martins. Thank you so much. This is really, really nice. And honestly, I do take notes in the chat box, but I could not keep up with all these very nice skills that you have taught us this evening. And I can't wait to start using them. So thank you so much for giving us these nice tips and tricks. And I remember this afternoon I was having a chat with a medical doctor, and I was, commending them for doing a very great work in putting so much stuff in their head. And we're talking about people not appreciating doctors, and I was like, you guys put a lot of stuff in your head, and you still, still reproduce it, and I don't know if everybody's brain was developed like people who study medicine and all these kind of courses. And from what you've taught us this evening, I see that there is a way you can actually ask more from your head, from your brain, for you to be able to do things systematically. And it really, really makes sense to me now. And to be honest, I can't wait to try using some of these things that we've learned this evening. I can't wait to start using this notebook LM2. I'll try all my best to make sure it makes sense to see two people hear two people discussing about what you want to, what you are learning. For me, I like learning through videos, and I think this will be really, really nice for me too. So my charge for everyone here, if I would say one thing, is that we are not in the stone age, we are in the digital age now, and there are 1,000,001 ways that you can do things better and not the traditional method. The only thing you need to do is to get the information like the one that Martins has given us this evening. So before we go into our questions, I really, really want us to appreciate him doing this special work for us and giving us all these things like it was nothing. So thank you so much. Thank you so much, Martins. We do not take this for granted. Yeah. So we've our questions are coming in already. We have one question in the chat box. If you have any question from what Martins has said, or it's maybe not even related, but you wanted to say something about studying and retaining the things that you study in your head for the time that you need it, you could just raise up your hand or type and put it in the chat box. So while so Muhammad Bello is already giving us two questions here. I think we can start with him. Others can signify by raising their hands or also type in the chat box. So the first question here will take like 3 to 5, depending on our time. The first one says, how do I know if I'm studying effectively or just wasting my time? Martins, I think it's an excellent question, honestly. Sometimes you're just putting everything there and you're scared that you might not be able to reproduce it when the time comes.
So I would actually look at it from a perspective of I mean, the question is quite specific to studying effectively, not wasting time. And of course, I would consider it a waste of time if everything I've studied for isn't what I'm being asked about, right? And I think it came up to the analogy that was created earlier on about Junior. And I remember asking everyone to tell me what they think. And it's quite possible that Junior actually studied. In fact, he read the material heavily. And at the end of the day, when the question was asked, he couldn't answer that particular question. So to Junior's engineer's mind, he has just wasted all this week. He wasted this weekend literally trying to study the material, because at the end of the day, when it mattered, he looked like a dullard because he couldn't answer the question. And the truth of the matter is, I know we didn't spend as much time on it as we should. The first advice I would have given in that instance is, if you follow through with the study system that we talked about, the first thing you want to do when you scan through material is to ask yourself, what is important here? What do I need to know? And then formulate questions based on that. If you're done with the whole study process and you're able to answer those questions, then at least on your own end, you can say, this is what I needed to know, and now I can answer them properly, right? So this section actually falls, at least in the very, very first part of the question of studying efficiently, it actually falls squarely on questioning, right? You want to engage yourself, but you need to also tell yourself, these questions are the things I want to really understand, right? When you read, you're answering those questions. And then finally, when you recite, you're trying to confirm whether or not you know what you have read, whether it's what your answers are to those questions are actually correct, right? And then final part is where you just review the whole thing and say, you know what, it's everything I think. The order I thought initially before I read documents, is it the way it is? And what I have learned, is it sticking? Can I remember them efficiently, right? Somebody just asked a good question that I think I'll answer with this. So the second part, let's assume this is actually a school setting and you've done this part already. The truth is, there is a big question of whether what you consider important is also what the person that is going to query you about that particular material considers important. And I think it makes sense that you should reach out to the person that is involved and ask that question. What is important for this particular course? What is important for this particular thing I'm studying? Because I shouldn't always assume. If that person is accessible, I should ask that question. Once that person answers that question, I can go back to my studying process and nail it, right? Literally. And if you notice, if you're studying in school, most times they will always give you a guideline, past questions. I mean, once you see past questions, you're supposed to, these are literally questions. You're supposed to answer them. So now you know what you're supposed to focus on. So if you're not using past questions in your study process back in school, no, but you can't literally tell anybody that you're studying efficiently. That's just it. Yeah, someone is answering. Yeah, So ask your lecturers like what's important. So I hope I've answered that question. I hope everybody's input sort of made it clearer. Let me see what the next question is.
Yeah.
Someone is
The
asking
next,
skimming and scanning techniques. Where does this
yes.
fall?
Yeah.
Okay. So skimming and scanning is literally in the survey. That's the whole point of the survey. Like you're trying to understand what the summary of everything is. The AI tool provides a quick summary immediately. If you're going to read a book by James Hadley Chase, you can find the summary on the back, even though it's them just trying to give you a little bubble, but at least they provide some information. If you take a technical paper, you will see an abstract. The idea is this is what everything is all about. Then you can skim through to get a sense of what the structure of the stuff is. Or it talks about an introduction. In the introduction, they said this briefly. So the skimming, the scanning, all those fall under the survey. Let me see. Let me see. Yeah, so answer those, but I'm really expecting more questions to be quite fair.
Thank you, Martins. Precious, you seems you are unmuting yourself. Do you have a question for Martins? Did you answer the question that says, how do I manage my time better during exam preparation?
Oh yeah, I sort of skipped that question. So Mohammed, you can type the question in the chat, or you can unmute and just ask the question directly. For the question of how can I manage my time during exam preparation, I think the first thing I want to mention is pretty straightforward. You most likely forget, because something we don't consider in the process of studying is the impact of sleep and the impact of stress. And if your concern is how you can manage time, like do all the studying fast during the exam period, it's not going to work. So I need to say that out of the box. What you want to do is the semester is say 13 weeks, 15 weeks. You want to start studying piecemeal from the beginning of the semester and then use this study system to ensure that you keep on remembering what's important. The truth of the matter is some people seem so good at studying, not because they are, I mean, they use the study system, of course, that's true. But the speed and the efficiency at which they gather information and retain it is not just based on the fact that they keep on doing spaced repetition, trying to recall or whatever. It's because they already have that information and they're layering on it. In fact, studies have shown that one of the ways you reinforce things you studied and retain them better is also by linking up old knowledge you have. So old knowledge you've had, you are in uni and you want to really understand something and read it. If you don't something that's a prerequisite to that way back in secondary school, it's always easier for you to absorb that material and faster, right? Compared to someone that's not done it at all. So that person is leveraging off already existing knowledge. And if you get to a semester, for instance, and you started studying at the beginning, what you want to do is keep on studying and layering on that knowledge. By the time you get to the exam period, of course, what you have to read is quite small at that time. So of course, you're finishing faster than anybody else started at that time. And you can read faster. I don't want to sound like a broken gramophone, but I'll use myself as an example. I've had semesters where it felt like the whole thing was a mess. And I end up reading just at the time I have mid-semester exams. And then I read at the end of the semester. It's always hell because now you can't really focus properly and figure out what you're supposed to study and do it properly. But the semesters where I started studying from the beginning of the semester and layering on top of it, by the time it's exam period, it feels like I keep on asking myself the question, am I sure I'm preparing properly for exam? Because it's supposed to be tense, supposed to be stressful. But I'm looking at the book I'm supposed to read and everything is, I mean, it's set. Like I know everything that is here. What else is there to know? Is a question that will be coming up at that point in time. So if you really want to be effective with time, I think question you're asking more is about time management. You want to space out the workload throughout your semester so that you don't have to stress during exam period. I think that's the best way I can answer that.
Thank you so
Mohammed.
much, Martin. There's Asana's and up before we go to Mohammed's question. Asana, you can unmute yourself and just ask a question.
Good evening, sir. My question is like when someone always understanding what she read before exam at the 9 minute of to the exam time, I don't know how advice can be rendered to such person. Which advice can you advise such person? She can only understand what she read at the 9 minute of the exam.
At the 9 minutes of the exam. Huh. So I will need some clarification here. What you're saying is the person has studied, the person got into the exam period, got into the exam rather, has looked at the question, wants to answer it, but cannot figure it out until the end of exam, right? And it's at that point, right, that they now figure out this is what I'm supposed to do, but there's no more time to do it.
No, sir.
Is that the question?
Yeah, let's say it's me. Whenever I
Okay.
can be reading for a very long time before the exam, but I will not understand it. Maybe the little one I were able to open paper, maybe 1 hour to the exam or 30 minutes to the exam is the only one I'll be able to remember and write at the examination hall. So I need advice.
Martin, did you get the question now? It looks like it's the retention part. You know, if she's been reading for a very long time, that one does not stay like when she calls for it during the exam. But the 30 minutes, 1 hour to the exam, that one looks like, you just grab it and go and you deliver it. So I think it's more of a retention over a long period of time question. Yeah.
I just want to be sure that, because there are two ways to look at it. There's the part where the person actually understands, they don't have an issue, but they study before the exam again, and it's only those things they studied before the exam that they can remember when they get into the exam. Or every other thing they studied before that time does not come true. Like they can't get that information. So there are two ways to look at it. One is the study process is focused on just rote memorization, right? And that is the reason why when we're talking earlier on, we're mentioning things like memory hacks, right? Let me see, but I can get to it quickly. Yeah. So if you ask Junior, even if he had read about the planets and he read it on Friday, but just before Monday morning, he read about every other thing about Pluto. But nobody's asking questions about Pluto. They're asking questions about the planets. He can't remember them because at that time, what he can remember is just Pluto. It's always easier for you to remember almost everything you read if you found a way to store these big information chunks in like smaller formats. So I've read all the definitions, but I have an acronym for each of them. And I remember the acronym, and it will help my brain remember the real definition. That's the way the brain works. It is there, but you need to find a way to easily access it. And that's why you have all these acronyms and please and acts, right? To get those information. I genuinely don't believe there's really a retention issue. It's more or less like an extraction issue when it comes to memory. There are stories of people that have tragedies in their very, very young age, and they only remember at 40 when something triggers it, when a clue triggers it. Your memory doesn't just disappear. You need to find a way to extract it. And the best way to do that is at the time you're studying, find little hacks, right? To encode that information, no matter how big they are, into small things. So that when you remember in the exam that, oh, they're asking for a definition of this. But when I learned about that definition, I studied with this information. So that information is what I want to remember. And that information will bring the old definition back to memory. It's not just going to disappear. It doesn't disappear. You just need to find a way to get it. And these memory acts are one of the ways to do that. You need to encapsulate big information into a smaller format that your brain can that you can remember easily, and then use to access the bigger information. The other concern I have with respect to extraction is you will not be able to extract any information if you've not properly studied them before. If you read in general, like you're supposed to read a book properly, right? But you just read it as if you're reading a novel, and you tell yourself that you have read it. You haven't. You've not studied it properly. You've just skimmed through. You've just read. It makes sense that if you're spending all that time, you're doing it right. Because if you try to now do that at the end, you're still essentially cramming all that process at the end. All this reading you did before might not be relevant. So be sure that when you read or when you study, you're actually studying and not just glancing through. So once you do that over time correctly, when it gets to the exam period, you will still remember. But if you don't, if you feel what we're saying is slightly different from what you're experiencing, I probably think you should reach out to Biola and we should talk more about it separately from the call. Because I think it's important. It's something that needs to be addressed. Sometimes we talk about all these systems and it works for everybody. But if there's a retention issue, truly a retention issue, it's something that needs to be discussed separately, right? It's a different case. Somebody else has their hands up.
Before we go for the hands, there's one I would like to due to our time, I would like to take Anita's questions before the last Mohammed turn. So what's a practical way you ensure you don't forget what you have read? What's a practical way to ensure that you don't forget what you've read?
If you follow the study technique, make sure you're setting up questions to check yourself. It's more or less like you grading yourself when you study. What I've learned, am I really learning them? So question yourself, review those questions, the answers to the question after you've read, and then review everything again. To me, that's actually the simplest way to do that. But if you feel that there's a lot of information and you really want to remember and not forget, then the slide I'm currently showing on the screen is actually the most important. You need to use memory hacks. There is no way you're going to store a whole page of information in your head at once. If you check out things like the Guinness Book of Record or a person that remembers the highest number of pi and all that, and listen to them, they have a memory hack they're using. They don't just remember. There's something they use to remember all those things. So if you follow through with the process of the study technique or the system, the next thing you want to do is figure out what memory hacks applies and use those. It is very important that you use the memory hacks. I'm seeing another hand up. I hope I've answered that question properly, Anita. If you're still in doubt, you can always come on the mic and always clarify or ask further. Over to you, Abiola.
One last one, and I think the first time we did study skills, our first guest made a very good answer to this. So I can, Mohammed, I would share with you a link to the first study skills. This is part 2. It was taken by Dr. Daniel Akinwolingwa. He gave us different methods of taking notes and different, what's it called? Different organized formats of taking notes. Martins also showed us the Cornell style. So you can always use this and some other ones. So I'll share with you the link to that video. You can watch it. That will give you specific answers to this question that you just raised. So thank you so much, Martins. I hope you send me the slides and with your permission, I can make it into a PDF and share with our guests. But there's so much that we need to go back, listen and learn from what we've heard from you today. And that's why I'm happy to remind us again that there is a YouTube channel. I have a YouTube channel with Michael Olale. If you search Michael Olale, you might not see it, but just try Michael Olale with SMP in front of it. You'll be able to see the 12 videos that we've done preceding this, and even this one will be live before this time tomorrow evening. So please ensure to go back to these videos for you to soak in this wonderful acts that we have, like I said at the beginning, these are life skills, things that you would not see a lecturer tell you in class, things that you will not hear somebody just drop on your laps. These are things that will help you to make the best choices, cut down on time wasting, go straight to the point, and get good results. So once again, in my summary, I wrote down that note taking slows down the process of forgetting. And I think this is one of the things that I will take with me tonight, that forgetting is human, but to not to slow down that process, good note taking is really, really important. And another thing that stood out to me is questioning, yourself from the material that you have, setting questions for yourself so that you can remember some of the quality things that you've learned. I've tried that in a very small way, but I think it makes sense for me now to, in the process of training your head to ask questions, you're also trying to help yourself remember, just like Martins told us. So if you try as much as possible to take some time to question the things that you've read, to set questions so that you can remember, these things will stick to you. And there's this part he also said we should give ourselves a reason, a question, and a clue. I think that is also something that I'm going to keep with me. So thank you so much, Martins. Thank you for creating time to join us this evening. We do not take it for granted. And thank you for this wonderful, wonderful slides that you have shared with us. Thank you so much. And for every other person that has also made it a date this evening, thank you for coming back. Thank you for always coming back. The last Sunday of this month, which is going to be June 30th, is going to be our next session on SMP. And I'd like to invite you once again that you should also invite your friends. Come prepared, and I'm sure that you learn one or two things that you could add to your life hacks. Thank you so much, everybody, and I would like to say that you should have a nice evening. If you would like a recording of this video or a link to the YouTube channel, you can always send me a message, just slide into my DM, and I would be very happy to share with you the things that we have already learned in this platform. So I'm dropping my phone number in the chat box. I'm also dropping my email. You can always reach out to me on this one. So thank you so much, everybody. You can, as we always do, you can unmute yourself and say good night, if you do not mind, to friends and folks. Good night, everyone.
Good night.
Good night.
Thank you, Martins.
Good night, everyone. And thanks, Killer, for hosting me. Have a good one, everyone.
So, bye.
Good night.
Good night.